No, that's interesting. And, it reminds me of, I remember early on in my life, I met a gentleman that had, we became friends. He had been incarcerated. And I remember that I was still going through USC, getting my degree when I met him. But I remember, just kind of looking at his skills and his abilities, his personality, and thinking, wow, this guy, if he could just focus on the right things, right? If he could just tweak a couple things, he could be incredibly successful. And I remember that eventually, right, because we became friends, I shared that with him.
Mhm.
I shared it with him only after I had kind of nudged him in a direction of going to school, getting, starting a business. And he just took off. Like he was just a natural. He started doing exceptionally well. And then I mentioned it to him, right? That I had, I had observed that in him, and then I had gently nudged him in that direction, and it worked, and it was cool to see that. But there's some things that have to be in place, right, in order to be able
Yes.
to have somebody make that transition.
Yes. So the thing is, if you're only smart but you're not ambitious, you're not getting anywhere, right? Because like if you just waste your talents or your intellect or your ideas if you're not surrounded by a healthy environment, right? Especially when your family doesn't push you or your family is holding you back, tells you not to go to university or tells you not to do that, right, by your own, or build a business, right? If they hold you back, or your friends, right? The friends can also be toxic. If they hold you back, you have to break free, right? You have to say, that's not good for me, right? I know that I can do much better than people that, telling me to stop doing this, what I want to do, right? You have to also be mindful of where you are and who you surround yourself with, especially if you know those people, they will end up in jail anyways. You don't want to be also a part of it, right? Because then it gets really difficult for you to really build something once you've been incarcerated, right? But you can still make it work. You just need to be extremely determined, right? Extremely ambitious. And not a lot of people are so self-disciplined to, even without anyone, to make it work, right? Without a spouse, without a friend, to still make it work. Only very few people are actually, that kind of, self-disciplined to do it. But as I said, you need the environment is very important. Not only like how you think, but also the people around you. It's very important for your own success.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, speaking of success, the final kind of segment of our conversation is how effective each of the two systems is, right? And maybe I can lead it off with just something, kind of take some of what we discussed and then some of what I've read. But in the U.S., despite the fact that we have a punitive system, right? The fact that we've doubled down on it to some degree, right? I mean, there is some rehabilitative approach attempts, right, that can be seen, but like the incarceration rate is still very high. Recidivism is still very high. So as far as effectiveness, we're not seeing our approach be very effective compared to the Scandinavian approach, and yet we continue to with that approach, right? Do you know, is there momentum heading in the other direction, right, in the rehabilitative approach, or are those just anomalies? Are those just exceptions?
Yes, so when you talk about, the effectiveness, right? Also for, when it comes to when it comes to taxpayers' money, for example, right? The cost for incarceration in the United States for the taxpayers is estimated around 80 billion per year. So that's an insane number, right? And it includes, the cost of public prisons and also jails. And the US government spends actually over 80, like in the end, right? Because if you include the public prisons as well, and also, private prisons, jails, it's more than 80. It's 81 billion per year. So that's an insane number when you think about it, how expensive that is to maintain, right? And also the total cost for the taxpayers might be even higher, right? Because a lot of taxpayers' money, they go instead to those prisons and jails, and they don't go into other social projects or social areas that are also needed, like school systems, right? Like any educational centers, therapies, right? And programs. So the money is like the money is missing there, while it goes to all these huge prisons and facilities, right? On the other hand. So effective, when you talk about effectiveness, I believe that it will be way more effective in the long term, right? To have those rehab programs and facilities in place. These programs that help, any offender, right? Of course, focused on, their personality and their and the crime that happened. But you need to make that, to really spend that kind of money on, those programs, because otherwise you will never see a change in the high incarceration and recidivism rate, right? Because you can't just say, like, that's not how it works, that's not how our country works, but then you will never see a change, right? You will always be the top number one for incarceration in the world, right, and recidivism rate in the world, which is not a very proud number, right? When you compare it to, we have Russia, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, but the U.S. is leading the incarceration rate actually.
Right. Right. That's interesting. And just to kind of put this in slightly different, terms, right, for our listeners. So, if you have, we're spending 81 billion, right? 81 billion. If we switch over to more of a rehabilitative approach, arguably you could save a third or a fourth, maybe even half of that, right? So now you're talking about billions and billions of dollars that are now available, even after you invest into the rehabilitative, efforts, right?
Yes.
Now you have this giant amount of money that's available for other things that have nothing to do with the criminal justice system, right? One, and then two, what we're talking about ultimately, right, is, do we take the approach where, an individual gets out, they still have the same problems that they went in with, and maybe some more problems, right, which is generally the case. And then there's a 70%, that they're going to go ahead and commit another crime. Do you want that, right? So your communities aren't safe because these individuals are coming out, they still have the same issues and more. Or do we save money, which is ironic, right? Because you're actually saving money by taking the other approach. And now, maybe you get to the point where recidivism is only maybe 5% or 10%, which means, right, in practical terms, people are getting out and they've changed. Fundamentally, you've changed them to where they don't want to go commit another crime. They're not going to go hurt somebody. They're not going to go take somebody's property illegally. And you've essentially created a safer society by saving money, right? Which is ironic, right? By switching, making that switch.
Yes. But I believe also, as I said, you have to have enough people that are committed to this approach and say we believe in it, like we did international studies, and it works, right? When we look at the country where it works, they did those, radical changes. They didn't wait for it to happen. They said, like, the problem will solve itself. They did actually those radical changes back then in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and they saw it, they saw it coming, like, slowly, but it did, right? So, they had to, you have to look into other societies, even if it's different from the US, right? But look in other societies that you want to compare yourself to, right? Is it, Western, of course, Western criminal justice systems, but you have to look at who is leading, the lowest incarceration and recidivism rate, and then say, what did they do different, right? Because it can work and it will work. I mean, the US is huge, right? The US is just a huge country, but we have a lot of states that are, acting, very individual, right? And they can make also decisions, right, for themselves, especially for the correctional office facilities, right? So you have to be willing to make that change. You have to be able to put in the effort and the work, and also to have as many people as it's needed, right, to make it work. Therapists and trainers and social workers and people who are committed to work with prisoners on a daily basis to say we need to get them back and we will get them back, right? Of course, there's, like, in every country a small percentage of people that cannot be healed, or they will not, they will not regret what they did, or they will not even show any kind of change in personality. You will always have that, right? But you need to, but it's not the majority. It's definitely not the majority. You have to figure out, why did this person do it? Is there an underlying cause that can be treated? And in a lot of cases, it's like 70 to 80%, it's connected to drug abuse,
Right.
any kind of drug abuse, and aggression, right? And like when they were raising children, in an aggressive environment, or domestic violence, right? This is a huge cause that can be trained, right? You can get healed from that. You don't have to be that kind of person forever. So when you see the also drug abuse, most cases can be healed, and you can recover from that. So it's not something that you're born with and you live your whole life, right? So I believe that it's possible. I don't know how long it will take in this huge country, right, to implement. But if only a couple of more states would go that route, and you would see those changes, it would also motivate other states, right? Or even on a federal basis, they would say, okay, let's implement those examples because they work, and we want a safer community, safer communities, safer states, less violence, right? We want those people to reintegrate once they're out. So it's just a bonus and a pro for the community itself and for the whole country.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's interesting because, the more I learn about human psychology and us as people, as individuals, right, the more I realize that, we're so fragile, right, as human beings. Even like people that have not had to go through anything super traumatic, even small things that have happened in their life will cause significant trauma or significant mental or emotional issues. And if you think about it, if you already have somebody that's got some issues and you put them in a prison, like that'll be a conversation for another time. But there's so many things that really just that happen, right? That whole prison experience that make that person significantly worse. And like you said, there are, I think if you were to take those individuals and if we change the paradigm, our paradigm, right, as a nation, and said, well, those individuals probably have some issues, have some trauma, right? The way they were brought up, what they were exposed to, so on and so forth. Let's see if we can fix them. Let's see if we can, and I say fix them, that's not the right way to say this, but let's see if we can help them rehabilitate, right? Help them kind of heal emotionally and mentally and psychologically. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think I would agree with you. I think most of them could be rehabilitated, right? But I mean, there's always going to be that small percentage of people that, and when I go to, and I get invited to speak at events, I mention this. I go, that there's some people, and I've met them, that just really cannot adapt to society. The pain, the trauma, whatever they went through in life that made them who they are, it goes too deep, and it's going to be incredibly difficult, or just almost impossible. Not
Yes.
impossible, almost impossible to bring them back. And those people
Yes.
need a little more time, right? But that's not the majority of people.
Yes, but do you know also why? Because as soon as those people are released, they get triggered everywhere they go, right? Because if you get released, you get triggered by certain things that make you fall back into your old behavior. Even if you have a good therapist, you have good trainings, you show progress, right? How long, you show progress for half a year, you get out into your circle, and you get triggered by the next person, right, that is just approaching you aggressively, or is like those triggers happen to all of us all the time. It's just the majority of us don't let those triggers react in a radical way, right? Or let them just, some people are like, they get triggered all the time, they don't react, right? They keep their cool, they say it's not worth it, right? It's not even my problem. Other people react differently, right, to those kind of situations. So the triggers will always be there. Or you get released, you had a drug abuse problem, you had therapy, but then you get into certain circles again. Alcohol will always be there in society, right? Or certain types of drugs will always be there and approachable for people, right? They know where to get it. So it's really hard to, again, it's self-discipline, right? Like, how big is your self-discipline? How much did you train yourself to get away from that, right? And to say, like, it's not for me, I know what happens when I do that, right? It's like nothing good comes out of it, and I'm just staying, I'm just going to change completely. But how many people can keep their self-discipline once they're out? It's easy, right, when you don't have the access, right? But once you're out, it just takes one phone call to a certain friend in your past
Or
to
some
actually
trigger.
get back. Exactly. It just needs one trigger for a lot of people to get back. And that's why we need like those mandatory therapies and programs and trainings to tell people, look, it's not worth it that you throw away your future, or you get back into jail, into prison. It's not worth it, because you have only a certain lifetime. Every one of us has a certain lifetime. None of us knows how long it is going to be, right? So do you actually want to waste your time, again, and not build something meaningful, right? Or not put out value to the world, or have a family, or have, healthy relationships, right? And waste your time. And a lot of people would agree and say, it doesn't make sense. Why would I do that again? And then be locked up and isolated, right? For years and years and years. So, common sense, most people have common sense. You just have to address it, and, to tell them, what they lose on the other side, right? When they're not self-disciplined. So, but I believe, as you said, like only a very low percentage is maybe not, part of any, healing or rehabilitation program, and cannot really refocus and change. But most, like the majority, is definitely able to change.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Fundamentally, I think I agree with you. And on discipline, just as a final point on the discipline, it's so easy to say, well, they should be disciplined, right? It's their fault for not being disciplined. But for our listeners, think about your personal life, right? Forget, incarceration and prison and all that. Like, how many of us are trying to lose, an extra 5 pounds or 10 pounds? And we know what we need to do, right? Just be disciplined and not eat that, that cake, or not do that. And how difficult is that, right? Like, how many of us struggle with that? Most of us. And for some people, it's not food, maybe it's something else. But it's discipline is definitely key. And I think it's something that can be trained into people. But in the interest of time, Vera, we're going to end our conversation here. This has been so much fun. Thank you for your insight, for your comments. I think this is going to be very valuable for our listeners. I think there's a lot of stuff there that we could probably talk about some more. But thank you. I appreciate your time. And it's been, as always, it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Ramon. Looking forward to have the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vera, for our listeners, right, that are new, that don't know how to get a hold of you, how can they reach you if they needed some help with, any legal matter? How can they get a hold of you?
Yes, so the company is all over the internet. You can find the website, right? It's lawyer-berlin-miami.com. And also we put the login and the information beneath the chat, right? So you can, check out the information, and also, get in touch per phone or per email, and send us a request if you need to be consulted on a certain matter, right? Or if you need representation, and then we can reach out to you.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, this concludes our conversation. Thank you again, Vera. Looking forward to our next one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.